Hello, my name's Jodi Eirich, and I am an associate professor at Frostburg State, where I also serve as the middle, secondary, and pre-K through 12 program coordinator. And in addition to my role on campus, this past year I had a really amazing opportunity to serve as the Pathways to Professions coordinator of the New Teacher Support Program. And in that role, I was able to work with the dynamic teachers at Northeast Elementary as well as Georges Creek Elementary in Western Maryland. And for the bulk of the year, we focused on social emotional learning, which is what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So, social emotional learning has really been part of the education lexicon probably since the mid 90s. But I think even prior to that, good teachers have always known that if we want our students to be able to achieve academically, we have to ensure that their other needs are met as well, such as their social needs and their emotional needs. And even as a beginning teacher, way back in 1991, I became aware very quickly that I had to address those needs in order for learning to occur. I had to take time at the beginning of the day to address my students' issues so that I could get them ready to learn. So we've always known that it's important. But really, in the last 3 to 5 years, it seems like there's been more of a national push, and especially at the state level as well, to have a more intentional or a more strategic focus on social emotional learning so that teachers are really getting trained and being provided strategies that they can use with their students in their classrooms in order to develop the skills that they need. So, in addition to serving as the new teacher support coordinator with P2P, I've also been really fortunate to be able to lead our clinical rotations. And so every semester, I take a group of students to Baltimore City so that they can see what urban education looks like and feels like. And then conversely, the students from Coppin State come to Western Maryland so that they can see rural education. And in Baltimore City is when I really started seeing social emotional learning in practice. So, for example, at the fantastic Gwens Falls Elementary, Principal Mosley starts each day with a mindfulness message. It's on the PA system, and it's really just a great way for students to begin the day, to get them focused, to get them motivated to learn. I've seen Principal Mosley in classrooms helping students to identify their emotions, to get control of their emotions, to kind of analyze some of the decisions that they've made, and to kind of understand how those decisions impacted others. We've seen amazing peace circles in various classrooms. We've seen a lot of restorative practices. And that was really powerful because it's so important for kids to understand that the decisions that they make can have such an impact, whether positive or negative, on those around them. So we've seen so many good things at Gwens Falls. And then this past fall, one of my student interns was at Rosemont Elementary Middle, and she and her mentor had assigned the students a task in which they had to create some kind of a game or an activity that would promote healthy living. And the kids had some really creative ideas. Most of them involved movement, and maybe they were using some equipment from the gym, like balls, something like that. But one little guy had a balloon and some other objects. And I said, "So tell me about this. What are you going to do? How is this, healthy living?" And he talked about breathing. And he said, "When I get very overwhelmed, when I get angry, when I am sad, I know that I need to practice my breathing." And he didn't use the word de-escalate, but he said it really helps me to calm down. And that was so powerful. I couldn't wait to go tell Dr. Wheeler because that's really what it's about. It's not just about us teaching and modeling these strategies, but it's about the students embedding these strategies into, their daily routines, not only in school, but at home as well. So many powerful things happening in Baltimore City. And then the social emotional learning focus really didn't come to Western Maryland until about a year ago. But we have students that are addicted, that are born with parents addicted, that parents that are incarcerated, are living with grandparents, living in foster care, and their needs are just as great. And so SEL has become a focus in the last year. And at Georges Creek Elementary, the one thing that I admire so much about those teachers is that they know the value of forming relationships with their students. And they also know how important it is for their students to feel comfortable with one another and that relationship building among their students, because it's important to them that they create this low risk environment. And they want their students to be safe. And I'm not just talking physical safety, but emotionally safe as well. So that when they conduct these morning meetings that you'll get to hear about if you watch their spotlight video, but when they're conducting these morning meetings, they want their students to be able to be very honest and to be able to get support from their peers as well as from their teacher. And they realize that they are not going to be able to begin instruction until these other needs, these greater needs are met. And so they make it a priority every single morning to begin with the morning meeting before instruction begins. So there are already amazing things happening, both here in Western Maryland as well as in Baltimore City. But then the pandemic hit. And with that came a whole new set of challenges for our students, a whole new dearth of emotions that they're dealing with. For some of them, they're situations they were already dealing with, but they have worsened over time. And then you throw in this remote environment that they're learning in. You throw in the increase in the racial injustices, and it just becomes very, very overwhelming for so many of our students. So what I'd like to do is just a quick review of the CASTLE framework. And I know that you're all familiar with that, especially if you completed the micro-credential. But I'd like to just talk about some of the competencies and then some of the issues that our students are facing and what this roadmap to recovery might begin to look like. So if you remember, the CASTLE competencies focus kind of on the intrapersonal pieces, such as the self-awareness and the self-management, as well as the interpersonal pieces, which are kind of that social awareness piece and the relationship building, and then that cognitive piece, which is the responsible decision making. So in terms of self-awareness, it's important that our students understand their feelings, that they own their feelings, that they name their feelings. Those are going to be super important in order for them to develop self-awareness. And in doing so, they're really able to identify the areas where they're really strong and the areas where there are opportunities for growth. And then with the self-management, they learn how not only to identify those emotions, but how to regulate those emotions, how to control themselves, how to show restraint, how to manage their stress, and then really setting goals so that they can make a solid plan for how to reach those goals. So those are the two kind of inside, the intrapersonal. And then we have the interpersonal goals, or competencies. So we have social awareness, for example. And that's really all about understanding the perspective of someone else. It's about having empathy, because for so many of our students, it's hard for them to put themselves in the position of someone else. It's respecting diversity, and not only respecting it, but embracing it. It's recognizing the support systems that are in place for them. And then from there, we go to relationship skills. So building relationships with all different kinds of people, not just the ones that look like us and act like us, but having a more diverse perspective. It's learning how to communicate and understanding that communication is not just talking, but it's listening as well. It's learning to cooperate, it's learning to collaborate, it's learning to reach consensus. But probably most importantly, it's learning how to resolve conflicts. What do you do when there's a fight? What do you do when you have opposing points of view? How do you resolve those conflicts? And then finally, the cognitive piece is that responsible decision making. And that really is recognizing our responsibility for our behavior. And when we don't behave, we take responsibility for that. When we behave well, we pat ourselves on the back. And it's understanding the consequences of our actions. It's understanding that even if we're sorry, there are often going to be consequences for what we've done. But then it's about reflecting and figuring out how you can do something better the next time or behave in a different way the next time. And then finally, kind of that restorative piece. How do you make amends with the people that you've hurt? How do you restore relationships that are impaired? So those are the competencies. But let's talk a little bit about some of the issues that our students are facing, because we know that many of them have all kinds of issues that have only worsened as a result of COVID. So let's talk a little bit about these. We have students that are going to really be struggling with fear, anxiety, and apprehension surrounding, the whole COVID-19 issue. Some of them might have fear that they aren't going to have access to healthcare, that they're not going to have access to testing because of some of the social and the racial injustices. And those are very real fears for our students. Some of them already have mental health issues that are only going to worsen during these challenging times. We have kids that feel so lonely and so isolated, especially here in rural Western Maryland, because of the social distancing. And as a result of that, we have kids that are really grieving the lives that they used to live. And I think we adults kind of are experiencing the same thing. We just want things to go back in some ways to the way that they were, but in other ways, we hope that this pandemic will make us better. We have students that are going to withdraw and go into their shells. I have students at Frostburg that call it turtling, where they're so overwhelmed that they just kind of put their protective shells around them and withdraw and just try to avoid and keep their heads in the sand somewhat. And, that's their coping mechanism. And then, like I mentioned, we have this transition to remote learning. So from March on, the students were involved in remote learning, and our school systems are starting out with remote learning this fall. And for a lot of our students, that's going to be a huge challenge. And even though school systems are doing amazing things in terms of trying to provide technology to all of our students, trying to make sure there's access to that technology by dropping hotspots, I think that school systems are doing what they can, but some students are just not going to thrive in that environment. We have students that they need to be in a desk right in front of us so that we can be giving them cues and prompts and reminders and getting them refocused and gently prodding them. And it's harder for us to have that kind of oversight and support them the same way when they're online. Don't get me wrong, we're going to give it a real good effort, but it's just not the same. And some of them just can't stay motivated in that environment. Some of them don't have people in the house that can help them to be able to participate in the remote learning. And I think that one, potential and probably probable outcome of that is a decline in academic achievement. And I know school systems are required to do these gap analyses to take a look at where the gaps might be. And my prediction is some of the gaps are going to be really big because of the time they lost in the spring and the additional time that is going to be lost in the fall. So just understanding that the remote environment alone, let alone all of the racial injustices that are going on right now, that have always gone on, but seem like they're even more pronounced with the pandemic, the health issue associated with the pandemic, and then, the remote learning. Any one of those three things would make it almost crippling for students. But with our students having to, deal with all three of them, that really is a lot for a little one to have to take on and to cope with. Another big issue is the financial distress. There are parents that have lost jobs, and so as a result of losing jobs, they're losing their homes. And for a lot of kids, their home is that safe haven. It's their comfort. And to lose that is very, very challenging, for our students. The food insecurity piece as a result of their parent maybe losing a job. And again, the school systems are doing everything possible to have school lunches available, but not everyone can get to the schools to take advantage of those resources. So, that's another issue. And then, of course, the biggest probably fear is that what if I die? What if one of my family members dies and they can't take care of me? So the students are dealing, like I said, with just all kinds of issues that are hard for adults to deal with, let alone little people. And so we've got to figure out, while they're in this remote environment, how do we continue to do our SEL check-ins? How are our students going to use their emotions wheels? Can they use the chat polls? Can you use something like Peer Deck to keep making sure that you're doing those check-ins? We know that working in groups, in teams is important to them. How do we do that in a remote learning environment? It's really taking the time to get with your grade level team members and your PLCs and really pulling together and figuring out How do you do what you already know is great practice in a face-to-face environment? And how do you make that work in a virtual environment? And then even when the students get back to face-to-face instruction, it's not going to be the same. And so how do we do the things that we know are successful in helping our students to cope with these issues when things are just going to look differently when we're social distancing in our classrooms? So as we are getting back to school for the fall, let's talk about the skills that our students are going to need in order to be kind of on this road to recovery. So I'm going to revisit those CASEL 5 competencies again. So going back to self-awareness, you know, the skills that our students need are the ability to identify as well as process all of these complex emotions, far more complex than probably pre-pandemic. You know, they have to understand who they are, and they really have to examine those implicit biases. And we as adults need to do the same. In terms of self-management, you know, learning to cope with grief and loss, developing resiliency, resisting injustices. And I think that if anything good can come out of this pandemic, it's that I think our students are going to be more resilient than ever. And I think they're going to resist these injustices even more than ever. So I think there could be some positive things that come out of the pandemic. In terms of social awareness, it's important for our students to really understand both the historical as well as the cultural context around the inequities that really became exacerbated as a result of COVID-19. But even bigger than that, looking at systemic racism and having that social awareness. As far as relationship skills, you know, building and maintaining connections is going to be so important. Anytime you're going through some kind of a collective struggle or collective grief, it's so interesting to me how people kind of come together and bond over those things. And that's going to be so important. It's also going to be important for us as adults to work together collaboratively. Like I said, working with your PLCs to try to find solutions to the new challenges. And then teaching our students so that they can have those same skills, so that they can find solutions to the challenges that are facing them. And of course, it all comes through teacher modeling. And then finally, for responsible decision making, it's analyzing both our individual as well as our institutional actions, especially related to others' health and safety. And I think, how are we going to engage kind of in this collective action so that we can help to form a more equitable society? So that's a lot, you know, and I always tell my interns that if all you had to do was teach, you'd have one of the easiest jobs in the world. But unfortunately, there are all these other things that have to be addressed. And my hat is off to all of you. I am blessed with amazing colleagues, both in higher education as well as in the public schools. And I will say, those of you in the trenches that are in the public schools, you are the angels on earth. And just know how much we admire you, how much we respect you. And I just want to wish you the best, the very best year. And I'll just leave you with a word of advice that I'm trying to follow as well. And that is, you just have to focus on the things you can control, and you have to let go of the things that you can't. And with that, I will say goodbye. And again, I wish you a wonderful year, and I hope to see all of you soon. Thank you.